welcome to this evening's event. Looks like Jeff is just about to join us as well. We have our very special guest, David Price, who is joining us this evening or this morning his time. And we also have Jeff Holt, who's actually going to join us as well from the Liger Leadership Academy. He is officially...
Jeff, put a light on. Put a light on, Jeff. Put the light on. We can't see you.
He's looking positively ominous. I think it might be the middle of the night, wherever he is. So without further ado, I thought how we're going to run the session. I just ask people to put their microphones on mute. In the meantime, there will be an opportunity to ask questions depending on how we're going for time. I've got a couple of questions to throw at David, but I get the sense that he probably won't need many questions. I sense he is a storyteller, and so it won't take much. Just press go. Ask him about the plum he was eating. So, David, thank you so much for joining us, and you'll be really glad to know that your book, The Power of Us, actually is what prompted me to set up the Disrupt Ed book club, and that happened just over a month ago. So we have the Disrupt Ed community here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and that's around 3,200 educators who are all really passionate about changing things up, and this is a bit of an offshoot from that. So without further ado, David, would you like to introduce yourself? And so some people here may know you, some may not. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So David Price, I tell part of my background in the book, so I won't labor it. But effectively, I suppose for the last 25 years, I've been leading innovation projects in education in various parts of the world. And before that, I was in higher education. And before that, I was in community and further education. So I've kind of worked in most branches of education. But I guess I got a little bit bored about having the same conversations with people some time ago, really, probably around about the turn of the century. And I got interested in how organizations function, really, and how they develop innovation. And so I've had this dual kind of existence. So most of the, I used to make my living speaking when we were allowed to meet one another. And most of that time that would have been for the business community. But at the same time, like this afternoon, we're doing a webinar course, me and my wife. So I'm still training teachers as well as, writing books and doing all the other stuff. It's a portfolio career.
Tell me about the professional musician bit. You keep just dropping that in, but with not a whole lot of other detail. It just gets dropped in. What's that bit, David?
It was fascinating because when we had the chat last night with your amazing students and the young women from Saudi Arabia, which I was blown away about, really. But they asked a really great question, which is, have you ever experienced failure? And it's like, well, who hasn't? But I talked about how when I was a kid at school, we had what is now, I think, the most pointless job in education. We had a careers advisor. I mean, now it's impossible to predict what jobs are going to be around. But this guy, I was holding and said, what do you want to be? And just because I did, and it seemed like the sensible thing to say, I said, I want to be a musician. And he just laughed and kept laughing and just said, well, nobody ever makes a living doing that. So I'll put you down as an administrative assistant. And that's kind of what I did, So I was a civil servant. I was the worst civil servant in the history of the civil service. It was terrible. It was humiliating and embarrassing to be so bad at something. And then one day I just stood up and said, I'm leaving. And I was 17 at the time because I couldn't wait to leave school. I left school when I was 16. And I left, and the guy said, the boss of our section, he said, but what about your pension? I said, I'm 17-year-old. And I just went back and told my parents I was going to become a musician. And to their eternal credit, they just kind of went, oh, okay, do you have a plan? And I said, no, I don't. But within 3 months, me and a friend who I managed to persuade to come out of school when he was taking his A-levels. The things I did when I was younger. But I persuaded him, and we had a life on the road for 15 years, and I had bands and, you know, records. It all kind of came to an end when, and this is one of my claims to fame in the music career. But the record label that we were with was managed by Sharon Osbourne, Ozzy Osbourne's wife, and she still has a reputation for being absolutely ruthless. And so she looked at the sales figures and just went, get rid of them, and that was it. So after that, I was like this Zelig of music. I worked in Ibiza. I was like playing piano in a bar just at the time when the whole dance and rave culture was going on. I thought, well, nobody wants to hear somebody playing the piano anymore. So eventually, when I completely ran out of alternatives, a friend said, did you ever think of going back to college? And I hadn't, in truth, and I just ended up, it could have been any course that I was doing. I really wasn't picky, but it was a course using the arts in the community, and that's how I fell into education. I would never have done it otherwise.
Because you were aborted by an Osbourne. Excellent. And tell us a little bit, just a quick summary. So many of the people here have read the book and chatted about the book online, but I'm sure there's a few people here that are yet to enjoy The Power of Us. Can you give us just like your 2-minute spin on what The Power of Us is about?
Do you know what, Claire? I would rather quote the John Lennon line when people used to say, this song, what's it about? And he'd say, well, you tell me, what do you think it's about? I'd be really interested in hearing what people think it's about, because one of the challenges of the book has been, you know, all along people have said, well, they said about the first book, that's 2 books, it's 2 separate books. And I was adamant I'm going to keep the 2 things together. This one, it's got more strands than that, maybe 5 or 6 strands. So it's been fascinating how some people pick up on something. I mean, Elliot last night got really excited about the idea of cooperatives and what they stand for. And I thought, wow, nobody's picked up on that thus far. Other people have picked up on, you know, the kind of the business about how you create that culture of what I call mass ingenuity. But essentially, my take on it is that it's trying to put a marker in the sand at a moment when I think, you know, we know we're in the middle of a pandemic, things are grim and they're going to stay grim for a long time. But at the same time, I think what we've seen with this pandemic has been an amplification of what was already happening, which was that we are seeing what I call user innovation, and it's springing up everywhere. And whether that is someone like the citizen scientists who are out there who are, you know, experimenting on themselves, and I've had advice from people about, you know, my cancer treatments and supplements to take, or whether it's people who are inventing, you know, widgets and then scaling them up, right through to, you know, the Greta Thunbergs of this world, because I consider that to be a form of innovation. Advocating for change is just as valid a form of innovation as anything else. And I just think there's this explosion going on, but Steve Flowers called it the invisible industrial revolution.
Yeah, and I don't know, for many of our educators here in New Zealand, like, I don't know how to frame this. I sort of have found myself at different points of the year experiencing a perverse pleasure in the global situation, handing us this sort of fertile space to get on and do what so many of us have always valued in terms of learner agency and you know, agile schools and student ownership. And I think the thing that kept coming back to me about your book, and maybe it was me reading this because of the space I'm in. So I've just been 2 years as a principal at Albany Senior High School. So I'm still a sort of a fairly beginning school principal, but I kept loving not the dichotomy or it was nearly paradoxical, your focus on, in one sense, I keep getting the sense that this is a toolkit for leaders, but it was also an argument for, you know, leaders becoming nearly redundant. So it was this sort of sense of so much of it was about inspirational leadership models, yet time and time again, it really came back to, you know, agency, of the people taking ownership and working collaboratively and working cooperatively. And I've always loved the idea of, I'm big on, people in our community know I'm forever worrying on about learner agency and self-directed learning, and the fact that you need enabling constraints for that to work. And for me, that was a theme that came back time and time again throughout the book, is that idea of what that sort of, what leadership looks like, where it's sort of a light hand on the tiller, but is actually enabling the ability of your, whether it's your teachers or your students within a school, to be genuinely sort of self-directed. Or
I think, I think you're right to point out that paradox. As I was putting this together, because I was telling the guys last night, I have no method. I'm sure somewhere someone knows how to write books, but they certainly didn't tell me how to do it. So I was just kind of following my instincts. And one of the things that I started getting interested in led to what I call, like, I've had hundreds of what I call shit yeah moments, where you go, oh shit yeah, that was me. And this business of strengths-based organizations, that you work on people's strengths and you don't spend so much time on the weakness. As a leader, I believe that my job was to do the reverse of that, was to just ignore the fact that they were good at that, but they weren't very good at this. So I used to work really hard at trying to make them, and of course I failed spectacularly. The other thing is when I realized that innovation, that the kind of leader that I was, which was, I would wake up in the morning and I'd have another 5 things that I wanted people to think about and start to do. So every day I'd be coming in, and it was only when I was writing this book, I just thought, shit, yeah, I was that guy who comes in, and eventually when you've got so many ideas which are kind of coming down from the top, people kind of go, well, there's no point in having any ideas because he's just going to come along and tell us what to do, and I was that guy. Having said that, I did manage 100 creative performing arts academics, so there was never a shortage of ideas that they had. But I think the challenge now, is we had a phase with Simon Sinek about servant leadership and the changing role of leadership, and all of that's still valid. But I actually think we need to go beyond that. And I think the job of the CEO should be to cultivate the kind of culture which makes innovation just an everyday occurrence, that, everybody does it all the time. And that's because the ideas are being spread horizontally, not trickling down from above.
And because you talk about, I like the, when you talked about, like, I loved your last book, Open. If anyone here hasn't read David's earlier book, Open, it's a really fantastically succinct and just makes a whole lot of bloody sense read. That's well worth a look at as well. And you talk about that. I think we've seen that sort of openness go bonkers this year. And you talked about the examples, obviously, of the open source innovation and response to COVID and all the rest of it. And I think one of the things I love about the New Zealand education system is just how open we are in terms of, I think we've always been very quick to share our practice. At least at least the people that join places like DisruptED. I think one of the things that really typifies our community is people's ability to be really open and sharing. You talk about flex structures and commitment to learning and mindset beating skill set. A thing that spoke to me was how do you say it? Is it Jugaad?
Jugaad, yes.
Jugaad.
Jugaad, yeah. Jugaad innovation.
Yeah. And it's hilarious because it made me think of, so often people sort of always go, how do you do all the stuff that you do, Claire? And I went, actually, I've always embraced the better done than perfect, because I just think, while I'm excited and motivated, I do something well, but if I labor over it, I actually get tired of it. And it gets stale pretty quick. But the other thing I really like, and I don't know if this is just because it's the world you've lived in, is that you move seamlessly from school to business to school in terms of your exemplification of the ideas in the book. Do you think that's something we need to get better at within schools? Like I have always looked to the business world and the community and beyond schools for how I want to lead my school, but I don't know if it's the norm. Yeah. Do you think we need to get over ourselves a bit in education sometimes and look in those other spaces?
I think we do. For me, it's all about the learning. So, you know, when you meet someone like Gary Ridge from WD-40, who has just built a phenomenal learning environment, you know, in a place that makes lubricants. It's not, you know, there's nothing kind of super creative in a sense. They've had the same product for whatever it is, 60 years, but he's built this incredible internal learning environment, which frankly I find it much more dynamic and engaging than many of the formal learning places I've worked at. Having said that, I think there's a lot to be learned in reverse, and it bothers me that typically I had a conversation with somebody from Adobe, and he confirmed this. And I said, just tell me, what is your usual kind of contact with schools? And he said, I get asked to come in once a year and do, you know, have an input into the careers day. And I said, what kind of input would you want to have? And he said, I'd want to be in there helping them redesign the curriculum and you know, shaping the curriculum for future needs of the tech industry. And I think we're sort of missing a trick. Now, you said that New Zealand's very open. The thing that you did, which is really impressive because it was happening at a high structural level, was that big conversation, you know, a national conversation about what we want our education systems to look like. And the fact that you engaged, you know, parents and communities and business in that conversation is a world away from what's going on, say, here in the UK. So yeah, I think that there is absolutely tons that we can learn from that. But I think more than that, we need to see business not just as a place where, you know, at some point maybe our students will end up, because I actually think that more of our students are going to end up like Jeff's students, as, you know, social entrepreneurs and working in what I call the artisanal economy, rather than working for big employers.
Yeah, and if I look at your examples that you've got woven throughout the book with Jeff's Liger Leadership Academy, with XP, with the other schools, you know, obviously with High Tech High, you're a real sucker for project-based learning, and that's something that's really on the rise here in New Zealand as well. Like Albany Senior High School, we dedicate a full day a week where kids have a free-for-all to do impact and large-scale projects that are similar to those that are at High Tech High. And Jeff actually got to experience our impact project showcase last year, which was and so did Chris. It was a really lovely evening. And do you think there is something to be said for that being, I'm a huge believer that it needs to be far more central in what we do. Like, I think there's so many ways that you can skin a cat in terms of the specialist subjects, you know, and that we need to stop projects being an add-on or an afterthought or a token part of it. And is it accidental that the schools you highlight are nearly all typified by project-based learning?
No, I think that's a thread, but I'd like Jeff to unmute himself and talk to people about the thing that really resonated when I interviewed Jeff, was when he said most places scaffold learning, we scaffold experiences. And I had hadn't thought about it like that until Jeff said it. Jeff, do you want to talk about how that works at Liger? Can we unmute Jeff?
Jeff needs to unmute. Jeff, can you unmute yourself, Jeff? I can't unmute you. You can unmute you. It'll be like,
yeah, there
we go. Woo!
Yeah. Thanks, David. I think that it's really interesting when the power of turning people loose in their learning environments, like letting go and letting kids really have the power to think about the world and interact in the world and not tell them what to do all the time. I think I didn't really understand, and I've been working in this area for 42 years in various kinds of student-centered, student agency kinds of environments. And I think I really realized lately, when you really turn them loose and give them the power to look at the world, interact with the world, and it's just amazingly powerful. Like kids can do such powerful things that I never even realized, even though I've been doing this for a long time. But really allowing people, as you were saying, Claire, with projects, or in our case, authentic work. We have our students do a lot of authentic work in terms of solving problems in the community, solving problems for other. And another really interesting thing is our students, we really get our students to think outside of themselves and out. So it's not really about learning content. It's about thinking about other people. It's about interacting with the world where you can make a difference. And when you actually really, for real, empower them over and over again, not just once, or not just once in a while, but like you make it a part of their life, where learning, as David, talks about a lot too, is that it's really about the learning. If learning is real and learning is authentic, and it's really extremely powerful. I mean, our students really actually know a lot of content, and they know a lot of like academic things, not everything, but in various areas, because they're really engaged in authentic work. And I'm really curious about why, if things as you were saying, David, about innovation, and there's a lot of things going on. I mean, I'm just so curious about, I think a lot of people know what kinds of learning really works with kids, student agency, really all of these things that work. Why isn't it happening? Like what is holding everyone back? It's such a fascinating thing to me, because I really, really believe now I see how learning can really be so powerful, that can change, and giving those kids the tools that they really need for their future. Like you can really do that. Like that can really happen. And it's not that hard. I mean, it's really interesting to know why we can't get out of the box, and why that traditional thing is like why does school have to look like school that all of us all over the world, in the US and everywhere? Why does school have such a structure? And what is holding everybody back, when we know through, as you say, David, and you're writing about, like, it's amazing. Lots of things are happening, but it doesn't really catch on very easily.
Yeah.
So that's fascinating.
And I think what you're asking, Jeff, is particularly important to the New Zealand audience, because I think here, more than anywhere, we actually have permission and an absolute license to do it. So our New Zealand curriculum is totally wide open. Our, NCA assessment framework is totally flexible. Yet for the most part, even at Albany, where we're seen as, crazy lefties some of the time by some of the community, we still have a timetable. Like I'm really interested why we get hamstrung in secondary environments by the concept of timetable. Like, David, how many actual secondary schools do you come across that don't have timetables? It's bizarre.
None. I mean, I guess High Tech High would be the closest, insofar as their schedule is, we do projects in the morning and then we do other stuff in the afternoon. But that goes to, I think, the underlying reason why we're all still kind of stuck in that box. I remember Larry at High Tech High, I once asked about the schedule, and he just said he used to work at a very traditional school, and he asked in a staff meeting one day, could we have some time set aside to talk about the schedule, and whoever's responsible for the schedule looked down and said, no, the schedule won't let you. So even finding time to do it, you know, it's so tightly structured. And the other thing that applies both in the business world and having spoken to Jeff was that it's this phrase for me: experience is overrated. So BrewDog, the craft brewery up in Scotland, which is now, you know, huge all over the world, it only started 10 years ago by two guys who had zero experience of running a business. And now they've got this $1 billion enterprise, and their mantra is experience is overrated. And, you know, Jeff, I'd love you to talk about how you're bringing in, you know, interns, and they're not, you've got projects that are not necessarily led by subject specialists, and yet the kids are learning phenomenal amounts.
Yeah, and I think it's
Jeff,
so many
do you want to
different
explain
things.
where you are? Because I think some people may not realize that you're in Cambodia and your context that you're talking about, because your context is pretty extraordinary as well.
All right.
Our school is in Cambodia, in Phnom Penh, outside of the capital, and it's a school for kids from all over the country that don't really have a shot. The students there are all on scholarship. It's a secondary school, and yeah, I mean, these kids experience the world. We don't have a lot of staff in Cambodia, and what it turns out is that is really an amazing blessing in disguise. The fact that the world is like we literally use the world as our teachers. And so I've really, I think all of us have really thought about who is a teacher, who's a teacher and who's a learner. And we really try to think about everybody is all together in this. We're all teachers and learners, and not even just saying that, but actually doing that, bringing people from all over the world to work with our kids, to do various kinds of projects. I just had a meeting yesterday with this group of our students, and I'm actually in the United States right now, in Wisconsin, and working. But I'm working with, for example, a group right now these kids are building a satellite, and they've been working on this one project for now 2 years. Yeah. And I just was talking to some of the mentors who are university professors in California, a retired NASA person, a PhD student at a university in the United States who is a space scientist, PhD student, and a number of other people from all over the world that are working with these kids. No one at our school knows anything about space, including me. I don't know. I'm a science teacher, but I don't know anything about that. So these kids have been working for 2 years, and now this one project is being passed down to younger students. So they're experiencing something that literally has nothing to do with our school in Cambodia. They're working on in this case, the most sophisticated project that we've ever done, and that is launching a real satellite, the first thing that will ever be. There's no space program in Cambodia at all. They are literally the space program, and it's very complicated and with so many moving parts, but almost no one at our school the teachers aren't teaching them. The kids are learning together with people from all over the world, literally. And even this year, when they had the COVID and they had their break for 2 months, they were just continuously working on this project. They were talking lectures, and so the world is literally a classroom. And there really are 7 billion people that we can all help each other learn. And when you really do it, it's quite amazing.
Claire, can I just come in on that? Because I'm so pleased. Well, I'm so pleased Jeff mentioned it. I'm even more pleased to hear that the project's still going, because boy, have you had problems thrown your way on that project. But I happened to be visiting Liger on one of the very early Skype calls, which took place between those NASA scientists and the students. And Jeff said, you know, you should sit in on this. It could be really interesting. These guys are working at NASA. And it goes to that thing about experience being overrated. These students really weren't prepped for this call. They were right at the start of the journey. They didn't even know what were the right kind of questions to ask these guys. And at the end of it, they got a really harsh kind of rebuke from the NASA scientists, because they just said, listen, we've got a lot of things that we're doing, so time's precious. So I would suggest that the next time you have a plan, have a set of questions, and they came away from that really chastened, but also determined that they were not going to put themselves in that position ever again. And I think that goes to the heart of it all, which is that, we feel like we have to be in control of things. And the reality is we gain control by giving control away. Well, that's a hard human lesson to learn.
So sorry,
I was just going to say those lessons of failure, of challenge, are absolutely not something that is taught in a more traditional environment where you have to face. So just in that example, they have now raised they've had to write grants. They've raised more than $30,000. These are just some a small group of high school students. So they've had to raise a huge amount of money. They've had to, as you were saying, David, they've had to work to get a lot better at communicating with people all over the world on this, because they have to figure out, how do you communicate with a satellite? Well, you need a lot of permission. And so there's international bodies for space. They have to understand that. They have to work with the government in Cambodia, who doesn't have a space program. It's like, these are political, financial, so many hurdles. It's stunning. But if we were just telling them what to do, or just teaching them about space, they wouldn't know a tenth of what they know right now, between physics, fundraising, politics, setbacks, collaboration. So it changes everything, just everything.
But Jeff, you couldn't tell them, because you don't know.
No,
that's the thing. That's what puts most schools off. They'd go, well, we haven't got the expert in X, Y, and Z. But the students are passionate about it. Seymour Saracen, the great American education philosopher, said the best way to prepare kids for the world beyond school is to put them in the world beyond school as often as possible. And that's what Liger does so brilliantly.
Fantastic. And what's your suggestion? One of the things I find is that I am the most excited about what happens in impact projects at Albany Senior High School, and I am the most excited now that I have seen us start moving towards our students on a Thursday and Friday are moving towards being self-organised and self-directed, and really excited. Yet I still get pushback from some of my most high-performing students and high-performing and the parents of traditionally high-performing kids, because they're losing teaching time, or they're losing, I had a parent that contacted me to ask if their child could stay home on a Wednesday because it wasn't, that's the non-learning day of the week. And it was just my mind was blown. And I think often people use, and I've seen school leaders do this time again, they use community as an opt-out and an excuse, because the community doesn't want it. I don't think the community understands what they want and what powerful learning looks like in this day and age. They're gripping onto the industrial model that may or may not have worked for them. And funnily enough, more often than not, you scratch me at the surface, and they hated school, but they're still clinging onto a model of schooling as if it's some sort of, bar. And in the media, we have our top schools, and they're nearly always the more traditional grammar schools in the media. So how can we're a community of 3,000 educators in New Zealand who are all passionate about this stuff. How do we connect and power up the power of us to educate the broader community so that our communities demand this?
I think by bringing them into the process. So you've met Natalie C at Sydney, and I asked Natalie this week if she could give me an update on the parents' education programs that she's got going there, and she just has a ton of stuff happening. Whether it's single mothers becoming leaders in the community and going on courses for that. But the most exciting thing, and one of those things that are, duh, why didn't I think of that, was when she got parents engaged in project-based learning. And so she said, let's do some projects with adults. And that has led to this huge, what used to be an old patch of ground is now this amazing community garden, which then leads to, teaching kids how to cook and parents working with kids. A lot of immigrant families in there, many of whom couldn't swim. So she got some parents, from the region to teach the others how to swim. There's just a heap of stuff going on. As a result, Natalie never gets any kickback from her community. She never gets people saying, why are we doing this? Because they're doing it too. And I think we've been pretty good at excluding parents from any kind of conversation about education. We use words like pedagogy, and they'll look at you and think, what language are you talking here? So I think to power up the community, we've got to, I believe personally, coming out on the back of COVID, more than anything, education should be about rebuilding our communities, because they are being devastated. Certainly here in the UK, we've got people who 3 weeks ago had, really well-paid jobs, and now they're going to food banks. And that's going to have a huge mental impact on our communities. So who better, it seems to me, to be the kind of fulcrum of rebuilding that community than a school? But it calls for a different mind shift, that we're not there to get kids to pass exams. We're there to rebuild our community. Yeah,
absolutely. And in terms of, if you think of the way we can work together. So one of the things that we've got going on here in New Zealand, and I'm sure it was the same in the UK and aspects of the US and all the rest of it, COVID exposed a gaping digital divide in New Zealand and an economic divide in terms of the students in the schools that could cope with pivoting and going online and being flexible and being remote. And I spent a lot of lockdown getting my knickers in a twist and stomping and jumping up and down and getting all upset about the lack of a digital strategy, an educational digital strategy that meant that, I think it's unforgivable that every school in New Zealand should have a school leader that understands what it means to be agile and to respond and not just pause learning until they could go back to their old normals. Like, we had a real divide. There were those schools that were just hanging out for returning to old normal. Yep. And we had those schools that were just, they actually seemed to thrive. They connected with their communities like never before. They developed flexible learning models. There was really magic levels of engagements with students that had, been disengaged prior to that. And, every now and again, I wonder if I'm barking up the wrong tree, banging my head on the door about needing a national strategy where we could actually, a lot of the best stuff happens grassroots and from the ground up in our communities. And do you think there's even a need for government and policy, or do you think we just flag that and just look at how we can mobilise on the ground as a group of educators? Because New Zealand's small. It wouldn't actually take much for us to reach every school and every school leader.
No, it wouldn't. And that's what makes it so fascinating. In the UK right now, we've gone completely the other way. Well, I keep saying the UK. In England, Wales are doing some really interesting stuff, and so is Scotland. But in England, we've completely centralised control of schools in one department. The Department for Education effectively monitors almost every school in the country, which is impossible to do anyway. There's just too many of them. But it does lead to this kind of learned helplessness that I think we've seen from leaders over the past 2 decades, that you just think, well, my job is just to be compliant. And I think what I found exciting about COVID was, to take that point, Claire, I was glad that some kids weren't getting access to those computers, because they've not had access before. It's just nobody cared. Nobody was interested. Now it suddenly became something that I think we've had to recognize as being, you know, completely unjust, and that we now have to address. I was glad to see school leaders when they came back in September saying, I am not going to test these kids to find out how far they've fallen behind, because that's the last thing that they need. So I'm getting a sense of, there is on one hand a healthy rebellion coming from leaders who realize actually they've got a lot more power than they've been saying that they have, or they've thought that they had. It's a bit like the Stockholm syndrome. You know, when you get released from captivity, you don't know what to do. But on the other hand, and this is what worries me now, because, you know, I worry that the moment could be lost. The people are just so exhausted. I get a sense that they would just kind of go, okay, let's go back to how it was. And this is, for me, this is a once in a lifetime chance to change.
Yeah. And I think we've actually seen some of the most exciting progress in education in New Zealand this year. And you know, whilst you were talking about the incredible stuff that went on here in New Zealand with the conversation, you know, and the consultation that happened, you know, the sad thing is we've sort of stalled at the conversation and the consultation. And I think, you know, part of that is because we've been dealing with a global pandemic. We'll let them off the hook. And we're now about to go into government change. But it'll be interesting to see how our government, should Labor return to power next month, how they're going to leverage this and actually do something strategic with it. Now, I'm aware there might be a few people that have got a couple of questions. Yeah. Katrina, did you want to ask your question about teacher training? I don't know if you want to put your camera back on, or if you just want me to ask on your behalf. She was really interested in the idea of how we need to change how we train our teachers in this day and age, in the world that you're talking about, and the sort of systems that you're talking about. And I think it's quite interesting, the teacher trainee space, because one part of me goes, yep, we need to address that, or but the other part of it goes, that's just a short time in a teacher's career, and we need to be lifelong learners and career-long learners. But you've worked in that teacher trainee space, haven't you? In terms of, and do you think we need to radicalize how we're doing that?
I'm going to duck this. I'll give a very, very brief answer, but I'd really like to hear Jeff's perspective on this, because, you know, if experience is overrated, how radical could we be around teacher training? I think it could be a very different looking beast. The problem, of course, is that it's almost impossible to separate the preparation of teachers from the system itself, so that you know, there's just so much stuff that they have to cram in because the system demands it. So I'm personally skeptical as to whether we'll see. I think we do need to see a change in teacher training, but I'm skeptical whether it can happen without a much greater loosening of the constraints within the structure. But Jeff, what do you think?
Yeah, I really agree with that. I mean, I really wish that we could rethink who teachers really are, and expand that whole notion of teachers. And when you become a teacher, really gain that understanding that everybody's a teacher, and to use the entire world. And that is not, it's definitely not what I learned in teacher school, nor has anyone else, just sort of changed the model. But it's really difficult if you have these ideas of student agency and all project-based learning, all these different other ways that learning actually really happens for people. And you know how to implement it. You got to work in a system, but I also think in a system that might be, and all over the world is fairly traditional. But I also would say that if you come into a school out of training with some really new and creative ideas about learning and how learning really happens, you can be a catalyst in a school, even in a traditional, like there's hope. But I agree, David, that it's just really a challenge. If your school is fairly traditional and and the structure, it's hard to bust out. I talk to my daughter as a teacher. I talk to her about this all the time. She goes, I want to do sort of the things that you guys are doing with your schools and so on, but I'm working in this big high school in the US, a public high school, and it's like, it's so hard to make change. But you can.
Well, that's a great thing about single cell classrooms. You can be really naughty inside a single cell classroom. I used to run a project called Hack Your Classroom, which was just challenging teachers to basically do all of the stuff that we were talking about in modern learning environments, and saying that you can do it within a single cell classroom, because for the most part, you're not being monitored 24/7, and you can get away with a hell of a lot if you're happy to be a bit of a happy rule breaker.
Yeah, you're right. A happy rule breaker. And the other thing that I think is really powerful is when you team up with other rule breakers. So I mean, I would guarantee that people that gang up together, even within a school, or you can get a lot more done as a team. I mean, I've sure learned that throughout my whole career. It's not even just my crazy ideas. Is like, get other people to go along with it, and you can, and also do good. Like if you are a rule breaker and you get some other people to go along with you, and you just do really positive things for kids, then like no one. It's really hard to say no to you when you're just like having these learning experiences in your little cluster or your classroom or your team of your grade, your level that you're teaching at, or your subject areas. Like, it's very hard to say no to give you money, to give you opportunity to do crazy and wild things if it's all good. And that's another thing that we don't learn in teaching, is like, it's really about marketing your ideas, and it's like, it's taking and being a resourceful person yourself as a teacher. It's not just implementing set curriculum. It's being your own entrepreneur. You're making your own brand within your school. And like, a lot of things happen in schools by small groups of crazy people,
I think that the happy rule breakers who are also radically transparent, like, I love that concept that David comes back to time and time again within the book, about that idea of openness and transparency. And we've got an incredible community of disruptors, and that transparency is huge. I'm just trying to pick up on that comment. We're coming into our last few minutes. I was going to say, I don't want to keep David up, but it's the morning over there. I don't want to keep him back from his mid-morning plum and
middle of the night for Jeff, though.
So we had this. That's been a big takeaway from the book. Not waiting for structural change and not asking for permission. Absolutely. I think a big part of you, David, is always encouraging us just to get on and bloody well do it. So what would be?
I mean, can I just say, just to pick up on the point Jeff made about his daughter, which is, I having trained teachers now for maybe the last, 15 years, I've lost count of the number of times that someone will sidle up to me in the middle of a training session and say, I'd love to do all this, but I'm in a school where I can't, where it's frowned upon. How do I work my way through that? And I used to say things like, well, maybe you should work with a couple of colleagues and create a kind of safe space for innovation, talk to your line manager. And then I realized that was not going to work. And now I just say, find a better school. Find a school that'll let you do it, because life's too short. It's just to see educators really feeling deflated that they came into the profession with such high hopes and they wanted to change the world, and within 2 years they've just been completely deflated. And I just say to them, go find a school that'll help you do it.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the, as I say, we're a fertile ground in New Zealand, and we've actually got a whole lot of freedoms and flexibilities. And thankfully, I think a growing number of secondary schools are now taking greater advantage of that. So as we sort of come to the end of our discussion this evening, David, is there anything you'd like to sort of leave as a bit of a challenge for the people that are here tonight, but also for the kinds of educators that are in DisruptEd who are actually they're an incredibly proactive and positive group of change agents, basically. And I guess it's, what would the message you'd leave them with?
Yeah, I'm trying to, as you're talking, I'm trying to pick up on some of the comments as they're appearing, because I'm conscious that there have been some questions. Is there any way that when this is finished, I can address these questions, or will it disappear once we?
I know. I believe I can download them and I can actually send them to you, so you can see them.
Right, because I'm very happy to answer. I know a lot of the time we haven't been able to answer them. To go to your question, whenever I talk to New Zealand educators, it always feels a bit like they're kind of going, I wish I could get more performance out of my car. And I say, well, what do you drive? And they go, oh, it's a Lamborghini. And I'm going, yeah, I'm driving this clapped out Mini, and so let's start from the point that you guys are already doing some great things. I think it's probably one of the most innovative administrations in the world. But my thing now is to take inspiration from those kids that I saw last night, the kids all over the world who are organizing strikes on a Friday to protest about the climate change, 13 million of them. And I just think if our young people can network and get a message out there which is consistent and coherent, what's stopping us? And so I would love to see now, because frankly, I've tried. I led a thing called Education Forward a couple of years ago, and one of the people who I recruited to that, it was Campaign for Change, and he just said, I'll come along, because I always come along. Guy called Mick Waters, wonderful guy. And he said, but I'll tell you what will happen. He said, you will have a room full of left-leaning liberal people, and you will spend 90% of the time arguing about the 10% that separates you, rather than the 90% that you have in common. And sure enough, he was right. Everyone had their own little single issue, and they're all perfectly valid, whether it's, they're against testing or whether it's mental well-being. But the reality is, certainly in a country like this, the dominant ideology is one of, we want traditional learning for our kids, and parents kind of go, oh well, that's the message that we keep hearing, and it's partly because we the disruptors are not getting our act together. And so I would love to see, if you've got 3,000 people in New Zealand, I'd love to see that swell to 10,000 around the world, 20,000, 100,000. There are some great things going on. Learn Life in Barcelona is Stephen Harris is there. They've got huge ambitions. And I personally celebrate the fact that we're now seeing this new generation of tech entrepreneurs moving into education. And sometimes they're naive. Sometimes they say really stupid things. And I think, God, that's never going to work. But I applaud their ambition. And so when Christopher at Learn Life, the guy who set it up, he says, we want to get to 100,000 educators before the end of next year. I think, bloody hell, how are you going to do that?
Do you think the creative liberals struggle, though, that we get all a bit excited and we get a bit scattershot? Because I suffer from, I'm signed up to 100, I'm signed up to Learn Life, I was signed up to the Modern Learners community, and I get bloody liberal, creativity fatigue or something, whereas the right seems to, strategize and organize. And we've got a body called the NZ Initiative who are going to drop a freaking bomb on us next week with a think piece about why we need to go back to more traditional knowledge-based education. And that will get picked up by every media body in the freaking country. And it will be wheeled out like it's the friggin' gospel, because it's evidence-based. So what we see is the Conservatives bloody good at organizing themselves and publishing tomes of evidence-based rhetoric, which is a bunch of bullshit for the most part, but it seems to, get people all worked up and excited and reinforce deep-held beliefs that they have about what education should look like. Whereas the left, we're off starting up 10 million different initiatives, and we're not coordinating. How do we solve that, David? How do we solve it?
We've just got to get better at it. We've got over here, we've got this group they call the Parents and Teachers for Excellence. Who's going to argue against that? Supposedly a grassroots organization. It's got about 20 members. It barely doesn't exist, but the coverage they get in the media is enormous. We've been running on Channel 4 this week this expose about how in the 2016 US election, how the far right learned from Obama, you know, who let's face it, was into Facebook and Twitter and how to get a message across. But the far right has taken that now way beyond it, and it's to a scary extent. But I think, you know, there's no point us just agonizing about that. We've just got to get better at it.
I feel like we're out dancing in the fields at Woodstock while they're organising, you know, their troops to go to war, you know, and it's sort of like, you know, we're so busy being, I don't know. And that's, to me, is one of the real problems for us to solve, because I see so much potential in our communities like DisruptEd. I see so much desire for this. And, you know, and this group of 3,000, yet a very small group is about to, you know, push a lot of our good work, you know, off the, because I feel one of the excitement about COVID and lockdown is, you know, people like myself, people like Nicola, people, you know, our school leaders from all around the country who actually, you know, embrace the opportunity to make changes, actually did get some airtime over COVID and lockdown, and our focus on well-being and our focus on caring for our young people was really elevated and escalated. And I get this horrible feeling that it could be very quickly undone.
It could, but the other side to this is, in every country around the world, parents had a unique insight into the learning processes that their kids were being subjected to. And I make this claim time and time again. Kids themselves, when you've been spending lockdown making, you know, 3D face shields and getting them out to your local GPs and surgeries, you're not going to go back and fill in a worksheet and feel good about yourself. That's never going to happen. No. So I think there's going to be a kind of kickback. I think also we've recognized that, you know, the mental health and well-being of our young people is absolutely, you know, now, just before I came on this call, there was footage of students who are back at university now, who are now imprisoned. They are in the halls of residence. They're not allowed to go out because they've got COVID. And they were having the most incredible party. It just looked fantastic. And people are up in arms about them. I mean, what do you expect? You've locked them away. You've said they're unclean. You tell them they can't come home for Christmas. Yeah, they're going to get shit-faced. So would I. You know, that's exactly what I would do. So I think there'll be a kickback from students, and it will start in higher education, because I wouldn't pay £9,000 a year for what they're getting. Absolutely not. No. So I think there's a moment of possibility now, and I don't want to get too excited about it. But if it doesn't happen now, it could be, well, let's see what happens on November the 3rd. But you know, this could be the point at which the pendulum starts to swing back.
Yeah, and we are going to be the people pushing that pendulum. Can I just put in a final request, David? Could your next book be a guide to how to mobilize the left as effectively as the right mobilize themselves? If you could just snap that one out for us.
I'm afraid the next book's already spoken for, because when I signed the publishing deal, the publisher said, we want a 2-book deal. And I said, oh, really? I don't want to write another book after this. And they said, but you have to, because you can't write a book about this and then not say, how do we prepare young people for the challenges that they face? So effectively, that's what the next book's going to be about. It's going to be about the Olivias. It's going to be about the Elliots. It's going to be about Life California. It's going to be about those amazing kids in Phnom Penh that I met, and about how we prepare them.
And who's
I've got one request for you, Claire, though, which is right now, the pandemic has just affected absolutely all parts of society, including poor authors like myself, who are finding that in the Southern Hemisphere, you can't even order the bloody book on Amazon. And if you do, it's going to be a year before you get it. But could I just ask that people who've read it, if they wouldn't mind going on Amazon and just leaving a review, I'd be so grateful.
Absolutely. We'll do a fantastic fantastic recruitment drive, and it will be far better than those people on the right. Don't you worry. And we'll get those on there. So in closing, thank you so much, David, for your time this evening. And thank you, Jeff, for also joining us. Yeah. It's been a fantastic discussion. And to everyone else who made the time to be here, it was really, really special. I will, of course, share this video through the DisruptEDTV platform and back through the DisruptEd community. And I will share those questions with David, and we'll find a way to share them back into the community as well, and the answers. So once again, thank you so much, David. It's been absolutely magic. And we look forward to somehow finding ways to continue the conversation in the future as well.
We have to. Jeff, we need to catch up as well.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
See you later.
Bye.
Take care, everybody.